Well, it's March the 29th, 2021, a little bit in the afternoon, and we're here with Ed Matthews. And Ed has many years of gracious living in the faith and has volunteered or been volunteered, or at least he's willing to share with us some of his history today. Just a brief bio sketch that I've been able to kind of construct is Ed was born about 86 years ago, or give or take. Graduated Calico High School in about 1957,
56.
1956. Attended the University of Arkansas with a major in agriculture. And a little bit of anecdote that Paul Young shared with me. You had a professor whose advice you took to heart, which was, when plowing, always set your plow a little deeper. And the implication being that increased efforts always lead to increased productivity in all aspects of your life. And so, Ed, for the purpose of this tape is to share with students in history, students in religious practice studies, some of the wit and wisdom of your career in the faith. And so if you want to just give us just a little bit of background about your life, where you were born and your family a little bit, and then tell us a little bit about what led you to become the missionary and man of the faith that you are today. And you're on.
Okay, well, all right. I was born into such a religious family, fine family. I mean, not evangelical kinds, but Methodist family. And to go to Sunday school and church on Sunday was, well, we 5 children have talked that we don't ever remember a Saturday night where we sat around saying, now, are we going to go to Sunday school and church tomorrow? And we lived 8 miles out in the country. We went every Sunday and back Sunday night. And I was the youngest of the 5. And even when I was the only one still at home, the other 2 still in the military or in college, we still went to church on Sunday night as well as Sunday morning. So going to church has just always been a part of my routine. But I do recall pretty early in my life feeling a very strong pull towards some sort of professional involvement, in the church, and therefore wound up surrendering my life or ordination and going on through that procedure and becoming, first of all, a missionary with my degree in seminary, and going on into Brussels for a year of study that the Belgians required for anybody going to the Belgian Congo, that we're going to require you to behave like we want you to. But that independence movement came as we were literally headed out to Brussels. And so it was pretty well cut and dry from then on.
How many years were you in the Belgian Congo?
We were there 4 years in the bush area, and we couldn't have been there had it not been in the bush, because in the cities, like the capital, Elizabethville, there was just so much disruption and killings and all of that sort of thing. In fact, I came to a very interesting feeling about how God moves to help you know when you're headed in the right direction. The country, Brussels, Belgium, was pretty well at war. And the war was between native tribes at that time. The Belgians had already evacuated, but some of the tribesmen would come looking for me. I was heading up an agriculture program. And the men that I was working with would lie to the other tribe, when they'd come looking for me. We don't know where he is. We don't know where he is. Well, they did know where I was, hiding out in the bushes just not far from where they were. And it taught me to believe that that God taught all of us to be brothers to one another, to take care of one another. Here I was working with people that couldn't even read and write. And certainly they couldn't read the Bible, and they didn't have, but where that scripture expounds on how we are our brother's keeper, I was taught right then and there that God is doing that outside of what Bible reading we're doing. And it was just a continual growth experience.
So did you have services there, or were you what was the nature of your work in the Congo?
Well, I was an agriculturalist, trained as an agriculturalist, and I guess I started in this direction to tell a while ago. If I hadn't been appointed to be an agriculture missionary and to work in bush, which was beyond the settlement of many military activities, we couldn't have had any duties of a missionary. But I was constantly in bush. One of the things we were doing, of course, cassava, mango, is one of the big crops, eating crops. It grows like potato, but you pound it into a cassava, we called it, which was a meal. But as you've seen all these pictures of African women with their big dish bowls and their dishes trying to pound this into powder. Well, my work, I discovered, was if I could get a grist mill, as I called them, and then a gasoline powered engine, that would make their work so much easier, and they could sell, they could produce so much more and sell it in the cities. So I set up quite an operation doing that. Of course, I could order them out through our Board of Missions. They would supply the engine for this grinding mill for me, and I would get villages to go together. We didn't just give it to them; they had to buy it. It was at a reduced price, I'm sure, but I would sell the instrument to them, and they would grind up the meal as a income for themselves, as they would have surplus left over from grinding somebody's mix. And so it was quite an interesting time, and I feel good about it. I think it was worth my time.
Right. So it was a source of protein and a source of carbohydrate, and it was an indigenous crop there. The cassava.
Cassava is what we call the meal, the flour but the potato was called a mango, and it grew just very much like an Irish potato did. And we dig it out of the soil and slice it up and put it in that hammer mill and let it just crush it up into a powder. And then they could make meals out of it that way,
So how did you leave the Congo? What was the next step in your career?
Well, we actually spent out a 4-year study. One of it was spent in Brussels, kind of by accident. We were going to spend part of the year there in study. That's to say, doing what the Belgian people wanted us to do, to behave like we were supposed to. But as it turned out, it was a good thing that we could stay in Brussels and do the kind of international kind of work, doing the trade-offs with Brussels. I mean, with Africa. But it was a very interesting time. The Belgians had always insisted that the missionary who was going to be living in Brussels was to pass a certain, it was actually a graduate program to understand how we were supposed to behave and live under the Belgian rule, But the very week that I was doing examinations in Brussels to determine whether I passed, whether I was going to be qualified to serve like the African or like the Belgians on reserve, was the year that the Belgians were asked to leave, that the Congolese declared their independence. So we were there when with the Declaration of Independence, and that set off a whole new movement then for Congo, that they were independent. Of course, there was a lot of suffering over that. There were a lot of killings and strife. Well, we went out in 1956 and to Brussels, and were there 1 year, and then went on to Congo for the rest of our study time. And then by 58, we were moving on into the full-time agriculture missionary work. And we were pretty well, again, pioneering to be, well, we built an agriculture school, and men that were at as much as a fifth grade education can come enroll in that school, and they would study, the production of agriculture, everything from livestock on through the vegetative kind of thing. And again, we were fortunate to be there. It was threatening at times. In fact, we had to move Pat, and our son Mark was a little more than an infant. We had to move them out a time or two to a safer country, but we were by and large very, very safe and very protected, and able to get a lot of work done by way of progressing agriculture activity.
I imagine most of the Belgians had a reputation for being extremely cruel in basically dominating that population. So you must have been an unusually kind white man, white person on the horizon for them to defend you as they did.
Yeah. Well, of course, they knew we were going to be in the bush, and that was pretty well uninhabited by a military activity. And the military activity usually would be between tribes, and tribes would find out one tribe wanted the missionary there, and the next tribe didn't want him there. And so it was an interesting struggle in that regard. But we were very, very fortunate all the way through. We did have one missionary that was shot and killed. He was our pilot. They put a plane out there, a little Cessna plane, in all of the struggle time, mostly to be able to take Native people to the hospital, which was a pretty good size operation there in what was Congo. And for some reason, they got mad at him. He was hauling their people, indigenous Africans, into the bush station there for hospital treatment, surgery, whatever. But they intercepted his plane as he landed one day, shot him and killed him. So it wasn't an easy time always.
So when you came back from the Congo, you came back to Arkansas then?
Yes.
And
what did we do?
Tell me about the years following the Congo and the Methodist, your involvement with the Methodist Church.
That's right. Well, in fact, I was still under appointment, under salary, this and the other, by the Board of Missions. And it was they who would put me on an itineration schedule. And I actually traveled the United States to a great extent with them making the appointments. And I would go basically from local church to local church with a school sprinkled in there somewhere during the daytime to speak to a student body in a school, and then to be in a church on a Sunday night. And then on weekends, I'd be preaching in a church. So they kept me pretty busy. I don't feel guilty about the salary that I took from the Board of Missions and any of it.
So you earned it.
Yeah, I think so. Well, it was very, very rewarding, very rewarding. I found, that our American Methodist churches had such a primitive understanding of the Africans, and rightly so. That was an antiquated understanding, but it had been passed over for a long time. And I was glad to be able to try to put a new front, a new face on that with the Africans. I mean, the Americans.
So you went to Perkins.
Hmm.
What years were you there, and how did that move you forward?
Well, that too was an interesting procedure. Uh, I had my degree in agriculture, which was no preparation to go to seminary anywhere. And the Perkins faculty wasn't interested in my coming for 1 year. I was going to go to Perkins 1 year. And I was accepted. I hadn't had any Greek. I hadn't had any of those basic things I should have had to go to seminary. And we no more than got there to Perkins till things began to fall apart in Africa. And it looked like we weren't going to be able to go on to Africa. But our Board of Missions, graciously and rightfully so, opened the doors to remain open. And so the Perkins accepted us for 1 year without the kind of basic understandings and pre-studies that I should have had to be accepted into Perkins. So I've just constantly been being accepted somewhere that I wasn't supposed to be. But as I look back at it, well, even at the time, I was praising the good Lord for opening doors that I never would have known, or the board never would have known how. Well, it was an interesting time. I shared this with the other Paul the other day. It was a time that our Methodist Board of Missions was coming up with the 3 lands of great discovery. That was their call for it. And they were going to be targeting those lands to send missionaries to. Well, that was Congo, the Belgian Congo, something in South America, and something in, where was the other? But anyhow, that opened up like crazy, and we had such a good time exploring that one. Mission. Interestingly, somebody was always coming in saying, "Hey, this is too dangerous. We can't do this." Well, I had no more than gotten accepted into Perkins, and Pat and I were married, living there, and I was there for 3 years, associate pastor at First Methodist Church in Rockwall, Texas. Just a driving distance from Dallas. Commuted to Perkins. And so that was an interesting establishment. But we were no more established in that till things began to fall apart. And the Methodist Church's plan as to how missionaries would be going into these 3 lands of decision. So I was just always somewhere where it wasn't supposed to be. But it opened up, it just opened up. And of course, the Board of Missions learned that I was a little bit foolhardy. I was going to be protecting my family because we just had the one son at that time. But that I wasn't scared. I'd use good sense, but I would try to plow the furrow that we tried to set the plow to, just plow a little deeper.
What churches have you served in over the past, from the decades, from the time you returned from the Congo and your speaking tours here? For example, I know you were active in St. Andrews, establishing St. Andrews.
Yeah. Well, again, my appointments have been very lucky. I was what you call the organizing pastor for St. Andrews. And that was a very exciting, that was there in Little Rock, here in Little Rock. And that was an exciting time. It just went like crazy for us. And we built a church in a year's time and moved in a trailer church. The Board of Missions got a double wide trailer, double wide in the sense it would park it side by side, and that'd make a big vestibule area, So that was our church to organize out in Southwest Little Rock. And so we've had interesting everything from preaching on the creek banks, to try to establish a church, to being in a real church. But what are you looking for, Paul? But we only served in that one church, establishing church, 1 year. And I was a little disappointed, but I thought so much of Bob Bearden that I was going to do whatever Bob Bearden wanted. Bob had wanted me to come to First Methodist Church as an associate pastor through all of this. And so after 1 year of organizing this new church, I went to First Church as an associate pastor. But wasn't there that long. There was a death down at Rockwall. And so I went to Rockwall in mid-year, but stayed 3 years. In fact, Bishop Galloway was the bishop and Bob Bearden was at First Church. And both of them were pretty powerful and they were fighting about me all the time. But the bishop won out and she sent me to Fordyce. And he said, now this is an interesting thing. And maybe more preachers are. He said, now Ed, when the mobile unit, the moving truck, gets you to Dallas, or to Pine, I can't get in right, to Wichita, well, Fordyce. You don't worry about unloading the truck right quick. Like you call down there ahead of time and get the secretary to give you the name of 3 elderly women who live alone, but they're very active in the church. They may not be able to go anymore, but they live alone. You find out their names and their addresses, and before you unload the truck, you go see those 3 ladies. And before the sun goes down that night, those 3 ladies will be in touch with each other, arguing where you stayed the longest. And so it will just build your ministry without you. And you know, I did that and it happened just like he said. But I think some pastors would do a little better off if they concentrated on seeing some people rather than unloading the truck.
So that was about, I'm sorry, that was in what, 1966-ish? 19.
Yes, that would be right. 65-ish and 66.
Now, how did you get to Wichita, Texas?
Yeah, I went to Pine Bluff first. I'd gone to, I went to Rockwall. I mean to, Wichita Falls. But I was at Rockwall in Arkansas. And the bishop called from Texas and wanted me to go to Wichita Falls. Mm-hmm. Well, the bishop in Arkansas was off in a foreign country on some sort of episcopal visit. And he said, I'll clear this with Bishop Galloway and it'll be all right. Okay, if you are sure. Well, Bishop Galloway didn't like it. That nearly jeopardized my ministry that I accepted that appointment when Bishop Galloway was. But that's an interesting thing about Methodism, as you laymen best not know, I guess. The appointment system can get pretty complicated and a lot of resentment can get packaged into it, that's to say, between pastors. I always tried to stay above that. I remember when I was first home from Africa, I guess, and being appointed to a church, one of my preacher friends said, well, what are you going to do? Are you going? No, I'm not going back there. What are you going to do? Well, I'm going to take an appointment here in the United States. Well, I'll be. You're good looking. You can preach good. You can get any church you want. And I remember saying to myself at that time, if appointments appear on being good looking, you know, I'm going to work my butt off. And I have. And it's worked out pretty well.
Can you think of an accomplishment that you're most proud of?
In the what?
Can you think of an accomplishment that you're most proud of?
Mm-hmm.
Something was a super achievement, took a lot of effort.
Yeah.
All your skills.
I've been so blessed in such situations that, you know, either a miracle needed to be worked or it was already being worked. And I was able to bring that to fruition some way, me and the Lord. Mm-hmm. So I've just been so blessed. Paul is just, and about everything I've touched has turned out pretty well.
So you've lived through miracles. I mean, that's the way you've advanced your life has been one miracle after another, and you never really cultivated the moment that they always presented, and you were always able to persevere.
Mm-hmm.
How long did you stay in Wichita Falls?
3 years. Yeah, yeah.
I think you were ready to leave when you.
Well, I really was. And the Wichitonians kind of felt that. Well, actually, you see, if you remember, I came back to Hendrix College
Mm-hmm.
to be vice president of Hendrix College to do with development.
Fundraising.
And man, the Wichita Falls folks just were insulted by all that. But, well, again, I worked hard at whatever I was supposed to do. And that fundraising thing just turned into a pretty easy, not easy, but profitable kind of experience. So I've been able to be in things that I can just keep going up and up and up on the ladder, you know, that was there for me. Well, again, I've always, like I told that preacher, well, I work my butt off. That's what it takes to be good looking. I said, it takes some hard work too.
Then you went up to Mountain Home, did quite a bit of building up there, didn't you?
Yeah. We were at, in fact, I thought I was ruined because when I came home from Wichita Falls, I had district superintendents telling me to my face, you'll never get an appointment. You have just tried to push our cabinet and you pushed it far enough, so you're not going to get another appointment out of this. Well, I was there at First Church as an associate pastor, and what was his name? Paul. He had a cousin that was a Methodist preacher too, but he was at Mountain Home. And very good, doing a good job. Well, he decided early in the year, or after all the appointments were made for that given, there was nothing else really open, that he was going to retire. He'd go ahead and retire. Well, one of the ministers on the cabinet knew about that situation developing, and then he pushed me into that retirement. So if that hadn't happened, I don't know what of that. But, you know, those kind of things of, well, I hate to admit it, but my brother-in-law, Jim Beal, did you know Jim Beal? Jim was a district superintendent and a very effective one. And bless his heart, I was 4 or 5 years older than he. He'd married my sister several years ahead of time. They were both in Hendrix. He loved me. He really did. And anytime any kind of appointment break was coming along, he shoved me into that thing. Well, the Mountain Home thing was one of those kind of breaks. And I don't know what would have happened if Jim Beal hadn't been on the cabinet, and because there wasn't a single appointment yet to be made for that annual conference year. And Jim knew about that Mountain Home thing. And that turned out, well, everybody kind of laughed at me. Mountain Home, ha, 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 ha. Well, they didn't know what I knew about Mountain Home. See, I'd been raised in that county, and I knew how the population was growing and how the money was coming. We relocated and built a new church, and I mean, put that church really, really on the move.
And then you came to First Methodist.
First Methodist.
What year was that when you came to First Methodist?
Oh, gosh.
Sometime in the
early 90s, wasn't it? Was it
Something
1990,
like
I think? Gosh, my brain is going. and that was an interesting. I again thought, well, the district superintendents have been teasing me and laughing at me for moving myself out of any appointment opportunities. Going to be right, I guess, this time. And Bishop Galloway had retired and was in Tulsa. And he called me one night. This was while those leave appointments were being wrapped up. Didn't look like there was anything left. And he said, Ed, you're going to Mountain Home. You're going to be appointed to Mountain Home. I said, oh, really? He said, yeah, Paul Galloway has decided not to, Paul, can't think of his name now, has decided he's going to retire. And so that appointment's going to be open. That's going to be a good appointment. And so that's the way that,
Mhm.
in fact, the interesting part of that, Bishop Galloway was born in Mountain Home. His father was a Methodist preacher at Mountain Home when he was born, and his twin sister. And so he had always prided himself about being born in Mountain Home, because it was a nice place. And I said, well, I'll tell you what we're going to do, Bishop Galloway. We're going to get some, they had come years later and put a plaque on the ground there saying the birthplace of Paul Galloway, you know. I said, we'll get some brass polish and we'll keep that polished up and really cleaned up. Well, the night we moved up there, I, as the new pastor, was to be doing a wedding of one of the Mountain Home girls at Hendricks College. So I had performed that, and I had my pulpit robe, had my book of worship, all that sort of thing, in the car as we drove back in the Mountain Home. And as I got up the next morning, I said, Pat, let me get my pulpit robe and the book of worship, and you just kind of ruffle up your hair and be in your bathrobe and all that sort of thing. And we'll go over to the church site there where that plaque is, and you be down with your polishing that, and I'll get a picture of you. Well, we did exactly that and sent it to Galloway, and man, he never got rid of it. He laughed forever about it.
Well, how'd you get your assignment or your church moved down to Little Rock? Was that something?
Well,
how was that in the cards?
That was just another one of those. Well, again, it looked like the appointment circles were filled up. And as I said, I'm not being able to call his name now, but he was at a retirement age. And for some reason, after the appointments were all made, Mountain Home was a fairly good appointment. You know, anybody would want to go there. He decided he was going to retire, and I got shot in there. You know, as I said, Jim Beal, my brother-in-law, was he opened up an appointment or two for me. I think that, I mean, things were closed out, nothing.
Was you in the regular appointment cycle when you came to Little Rock, though, or was that?
No, that was kind of an irregular one. Let's see, how did that happen? The appointments were all closed out, and I had said if there was anything open, I would like to move on out of Mountain Home. Well, the appointments were all locked up, and you know, in the sense of everything made, everything closed. And again, Bishop Galloway, in his retirement, living over there at Tulsa, called me up. Says, you're going to get a call in a few minutes from the bishop. You're going to go to Little Rock First Methodist Church. I said, oh, well, you just wait. I know what I'm talking about. So it's exactly the way it happened. 2010.
Mm-hmm.
I've been retired 10 years now.
Mm-hmm.
There are some really brilliant young people coming into the faith now, serving in a variety of new creative positions in churches, like a director of communications, for example, with Michael McMurray over at Pulaski Heights. What would you tell these young men and women who want to pursue a life in the church? What kind of counsel, what advice would you give them?
Well, I think I would want to visit with them a good bit to see where they were and their feelings and their commitment to set the plow deeper, as the expression goes. But, well, there's a sense, well, you see, the first 10 years of my retirement from First Methodist Church, Little Rock, I, in a sense, was a researcher for the bishop. And we had three of them in the meantime. When they had a church that was thinking about changing, you know, their appointment, changing how And I tried to research that more thoroughly than a cabinet minister could do, the district superintendent, who should have been doing that. And we opened up some good appointments in that way, because I was able to uh, pay close attention to it. That was only one at a time that I was dealing with. I knew what was going on at other places. And actually, it kind of opened up a more positive way for making appointments. In fact, I don't know whether they still use it or not. I wrote up quite a procedure thing for the way when the church was needing a new pastor, that I would go in at the bishop's appointment, usually very quietly at first, and we would decide together why it is this church needs a change of pastor right now, and what would it take. And to say, we wrote up kind of a manual about how that took place. And because I wasn't really on the cabinet or anything, I wasn't a threat to anybody. They didn't know what I was doing. And we made some good appointments, and I'm proud of that work. In fact, we were still going at it lickety split when our new bishop that's here now, been here, 4 years or whatever, the bishop, well, the one who went to Oklahoma, what the heck was his name? His daddy was a Methodist bishop. But anyhow, that bishop told this new bishop about what we had in place by my helping to open up possibilities for, well, anyhow, he explained that to the bishop, the new bishop, and he called me in and he said, yeah, we really want to continue that. We really want to make that work. So you just be available. But he never called. And that has never moved an inch. And it was a good procedure. In fact, the whole Methodist Church, the Connectional Church, came to rely very handily on that kind of consultation process. That worked out pretty well.
We've just about worn you out, Ed. I know it's been a great effort. Can you say a few minutes, just spend a few minutes on the museum, the Methodist Museum, and how that got started?
Yes, the Methodist Museum in Arkansas. Kind of a two-phased. Jim Beal, my brother-in-law, who was a genius and retired 2 or 3 years before I did. He was a district superintendent, and well, there was another connectional kind, but anyhow, it caused him to be circling the whole state of Methodism. Well, he was quite a collector, and he would be somewhere. Hey, we've got this old pew. Would you like to do something? We've got this old pulpit. And he would come home with his car loaded down about every time he'd come home, and no place to put it. And so we decided, well, if we put in motion the museum kind of thing, well, we did that, but pretty quickly discovered we didn't have space or room for this, to take place, and no place begging for it. But still, Jim was bringing home every time he'd come off the state something, that he picked up somewhere. Everything from a pulpit Bible to a hymn book to any of historic significance. Well, that soon began to crowd everything out of being. And so that's when we opened up at Hendrix College the museum that's up there. And of course, as the museum came to be, we made the distinction, and this is by the discipline nearly, that the church's museum has to do with the printed material, and like books and all that sort of thing. But that there's still the call for hard material like pews and pulpits. And so that's when we began Hendrix didn't have space for that. And so that's when we found the place, first of all, of the old Quapaw Church, which was the Winfield, wasn't it? Winfield Methodist Church, which was now empty, vacated, and could put the material that we were picking up that was of historic value. So it's just one of those things, again, that kind of unfolded. Jim Beal was a part of all that, and I had nothing to do with it. And he said, Ed, I got to have some help. So this place is just killing me. Said, we've got to find a place. So that we began to look for a more permanent hiding place. And it is, well, one of the saddest things that happened. And I just woke up thinking about this the other night. It's been 20 years ago now. Somebody gave that museum in Jim Beal's day a circuit riding saddle. A saddle that a circuit rider had actually used as they rode the circuit, you know. Well, somebody stole that sucker, and we don't know where it is to this day. But that would have been a real collector's item to have that. And that those kind of items were what started the museum.
Use your perspective of the past to talk about the future.
Well, wish you hadn't asked that one. I'm against whatever they're looking at, because I think it's going to cut a hole in some places that need to happen in our Methodist Church. It's going to affect some doctrinal kind of things. So I don't know how this all came about. Nobody asked me. Nobody asked me. So it doesn't look good. Of course, there's a sense in which this whole pandemic thing, you know, that's tearing our world apart, that's going to be good maybe for the Methodist Church. And all this thinking, well, wait, there's too much going on, you know, here. We better back off and just kind of hold everything in position for a while, because I think it has the chance of being very divisive, you know. And I'm not a very divisive sort of fellow. So, but I can't. In fact, I've got a call in to David, our pastor. He's pretty much on the top side of that. See what kind of reading he has on it. But well, again, I think this whole pandemic sort of thing is kind of serving a good cause here to get us to slow down and say, wait a minute now, let's take our time.
Well, the purpose of this interview has been to capture wit and wisdom of leaders in the faith, and you have certainly led a charmed in some way, but a dedicated life that has touched the lives of so many people around the world. And it's such an honor to be with you today. And is there anything else, Paul Young, or you would like to say about this interview?
I don't have anything else to offer.
Well, I'm sure grateful. I don't know what you're going to do with all this interview business, but I'm grateful that you let me be a part of it, and just holding the tongue, everything's going to come out like roses from it because of the work you all have done and the people you've evaluated, interviewed with.
Well, thank you, Ed. And I'd like to thank also Paul Young. Paul, without your technical expertise, we wouldn't have been able to pull this off today. And Ed, for your patience with us, your very gracious sharing of your life story. Thank you so much. And when we get it, we're going to edit it down. It'll be recorded. And in the future, it'll be available for students in history, religion. People might be interested actually in how the Belgian Congo was managing during the times that you were there. So there's no telling how many lives will benefit from your story moving forward. And there's no telling how many lives have benefited from your life to this point. Thank you so much for taking this moment and sharing it with us. Bye for now.
Well, thank you all for taking the time to do it.